What's up, everybody? My name is Dell. This is Dell on Movies. Thanks for hanging out with me. If you've been here before, thanks for hanging out with me again. And today is the day we're finally going to do it. We're going ahead. I'm going ahead anyway, and I'm going to rank all 30 of the cinematically released movies in the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We're setting aside the TV shows for now. Maybe we'll do that one day, but we're just going to talk about the ones that have hit the big screen, went into the theaters. And I'm a big fan of the franchise. Most of the movies here I do like. And we're going to get started at the bottom of the list, so I've got to talk about the ones I don't like as well. And let's just go ahead and get right to it. Number 30 for me is Thor: The Dark World. And for me, this movie, it's pretty much a bore. The villain is not good. Thor himself is almost like a side character, and he's just not really developed into the character that we know now. And he was definitely still a work in progress. Loki, the best part of the movie, couldn't quite save it for me. In retrospect, what the MCU did in later films, though, does make this movie relevant. So when I'm watching back through the franchise, I don't skip movies, but I wouldn't skip it anyway because there are a lot of things that happen in here that do turn up later to be important. Moving up to number 29 is going to be Iron Man 3. So Iron Man 3 is also a bit of a mess. A lot of people hate it because of the twist with the Mandarin, and I won't spoil it any further than that, though. Even if you're here, you've probably watched Iron Man 3 and most, if not all, of these movies. So that is not my reason for hating it. It's okay. It's not as terrible as some people make it out, but there are some other things that happen in the movie that just don't work for me at all. The kid's performance, that's one of the things. Another being how Tony finally gets his armor back at the end of the movie, the speed at which it happens. None of those things just make a ton of sense to me, and they just all pile up to where I couldn't really enjoy the movie that much. So I don't hate it, but it's just not one of my favorites at all. Number 28 is one of the movies that came out this year, and that is going to be another Thor movie, Thor: Love and Thunder. And what this movie did was it took the previous Thor movie, Thor Ragnarok, and it just cranked up the humor just exponentially, almost at the expense of everything else. It gave us some pretty decent action scenes, but it was kind of groan inducing, eyeball inducing, and what could have been a great character study with Jane, and even great relationship study with Thor and Jane, doesn't really pan out the way that they wanted to. The whole thing with Russell Crowe was kind of a mess. Like I said, it was just too much. It was just whereas Ragnarok, I'll talk about Ragnarok later on, but here they just kind of took the humor and took it from here to there, and it doesn't really work for me. Number 27, and we're gonna get into the movies where I think these are okay. I don't hate them. I don't love them. They're okay, and we'll be here for a little while actually. So number 27 is Ant-Man and the Wasp, so the second Ant-Man movie. So again, it's a fun movie. It's kind of lighthearted. Stakes are really low, but it's just okay. What could be a really great villain with Ghost, it is actually pretty good. So I will say this. I will say she's actually pretty good, but is not quite as satisfying as some of the other villains in the franchise, and not enough to really raise this movie. And it's another one where the comedy elements might have been just a little too much. So Marvel seems to do that from time to time. And that will move us on to number 26. 26 is a movie that doesn't really have that issue. It might even be too serious, and that is Captain Marvel. So again, it's another movie I don't hate like everybody else seems to hate. It's kind of gotten cool to hate Captain Marvel. So for me, the problem with Captain Marvel is the way that the main character is written. She's written, and not the actress. I know a lot of people don't like Brie Larson, or have come out and said they don't like Brie Larson. I personally think she's an outstanding actress, and if you've seen some of her work outside the MCU, you might agree with that. But here, the way her character is written is so standoffish, even to the audience, that you can never really connect with her. and a lot of some of that is meant because she's dealing with all the memory loss issues, so they don't want to give too much away at one time, but it's just not executed in a way that pulls the audience in. It's executed in a way where she feels cold and distant. So that's my biggest issue with Captain Marvel. Moving up to 25, it's going to be the first Thor movie, and here is where Chris Hemsworth, he's again, is work in progress as far as Thor goes, and they really try to stick to the Shakespearean aspects of the character, and that even goes right down to picking Kenneth Branagh for a director known for his work in the Shakespearean universe. And the movie works. It works as well, but my big problem with all the Thor movies that she appears in anyway is that I never really feel chemistry. I know some people do. I just doesn't really feel work for me like that. So the romance part of it just feels overplayed. And the fish out of water thing works to an extent. So I will stick with Thor at number 25. Number 24 is a movie that seems to get better for me as I watch it, and every time I come back to it, and that's The Incredible Hulk. And it's kind of the forgotten child of the MCU. People sometimes even just forget it's even part of the MCU, and part of that has to do with the fact that Ed Norton plays Bruce Banner and the Hulk, and not Mark Ruffalo. And I thought Norton was pretty good in the role. The movie, it's got a lot going on. It's just fun. It's not the massive stakes of later MCU movies. I thought the CGI Hulk, I thought might have been maybe a little bit too muscular. I guess you would say that, too veiny. So I'm glad they toned him down a bit from the current Hulk, even though I think a mix of the two would be best. But anyway, Hulk comes in at number 24. Number 23 is the middle Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Far From Home. So that movie, it's again, one of the things that I don't like about the Spider-Man movies in the MCU is that they kind of make New York, that New York is not a character. Let me put it that way. When I was growing up reading Spider-Man comic books, New York City was a huge character in the stories. That's not so much the case here, and in this case, he's not even in America. And that's just one small part, and it's not that I want him to cling to just being in New York. It's that once we get there, then the story with him and Mysterio was kind of a bit obvious and on the nose. The things Tony Stark did before passing that we're told in the movie don't necessarily make a lot of sense for the plot. And then the way it's all carried out, it doesn't quite gel as well as it should. And then they kind of go too far with the Aunt May thing. I get it. I totally get it. Marissa Tomei is a gorgeous woman, but they really just kind of just kept overplaying that one with her and Happy. And so Spider-Man Far From Home, again, not a bad movie, just my least favorite of the three Spider-Man movies in the MCU. Moving up to 22 is a movie that I actually expect to grow on me, and that is Eternals. So this movie, it is a slow burning movie. That's definitely for the MCU. As I've heard other people say, it's probably the least MCU movie in the franchise, and it's completely self-contained, or at least it seems completely self-contained. I'm sure later they'll go back and there'll be things in this movie that are important, but it feels the most self-contained of all the franchise, pretty much. And it works in that way. It's a character study. It's a slow build. My issues with it is, it is pretty slow, and so it takes its time trying to kind of drawing you in. So I can forgive people who were kind of bored at the beginning and not drawing in immediately. And then the other thing is, it is a character study, but there are so many characters, so it's kind of hard to really get attached to everyone the way that the movie needs for it to fully work. Overall, again, good movie, and I expect that subsequent watches will help me enjoy the movie better and possibly help it move up the list for me. Number 21 is Iron Man 2. So Iron Man 2 is the one where Mickey Rourke is the main bad guy, and I'm gonna go ahead, and maybe this is a hot take for some of you because I've heard a lot of people don't like his character, but I really like him as a villain. I thought he was excellent, and he brought a lot of gravitas to the character. He brought some menace to the character. He was a far better villain than the other villain in the movie, which was Sam Rockwell. Sam Rockwell's character, and most people, when you break it down to why they like Sam Rockwell's character, is because he dances, and Sam Rockwell dances in all his movies. I mean, okay, whatever, but it's definitely a better movie than Iron Man 3 for me. And like I said, I do like Iron Man 2, and I really like Mickey Rourke in the movie. This is not the one where Tony Stark is the he's not overshadowing Mickey Rourke in this movie. Let me put it that way. Number 20 is Black Widow. So for this movie, when I watched it again, it works overall for me. And some of the issues that I had with the movie, well, the first issue, of course, is it was 5-6 years too late. This should have been a movie that came out, honestly, really, maybe even 7-8 years too late. This is a movie that probably should have came out after Iron Man 2, in which Black Widow debuted, or somewhere in that time frame between the first couple of Captain America movies and the Thor movies. So it should have been in that time frame, and if it had come out then, it probably would be a completely different movie. But what we got here is not bad. I really like the family aspect that they kind of played into for much of the movie. Some of the things at the end of the movie were kind of iffy, kind of hit or miss, and there were some kind of iffy CGI moments, especially in that finale. A lot of people didn't like the villain here, or at least the two villains, one of the main henchmen, I should say. And one reason is that they're gender swapped, and I don't really care about that. The other reason is they're just not the same personality, and I understand. But I thought it worked well enough for the movie, so I didn't think she was a brilliant character or anything like that. But it wasn't egregiously bad. Let me put it this way. Number 19 is where I'm gonna lose a lot of people, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna hear clicking noises of people just clicking off the video right after I say this. But number 19 for me is the first Guardians of the Galaxy. So yeah, it's a really fun movie, no doubt about it. It's a really fun movie. I just never connect with this movie the way that other people do. I don't know what it is, but for some reason I just never really connect with this one. It is a fun time. The soundtrack is amazing. Groot, of course, is amazing, and Rocket Raccoon. They're all great characters, but when it all comes together, it just never quite works for me. And like I said, I'm not 100% sure on why that is, and maybe it's the fact that our main hero, Chris Pratt's hero, is just a little too goofy. And maybe that's it for me. But Guardians of the Galaxy is a good movie. It's at number 19. And Shang-Chi gets number 19 for me. 18, sorry. And again, right at the beginning of the movie, it was playing like a superhero flick that was an homage to Jackie Chan movies. And it was working really well for me. When the scenery shifted and they wound up going back to China, the story then changed into this supernatural kind of thing. And with the dragons, and it didn't quite work for me the same way. And I'm a little saddened because that's the half of the movie that Michelle Yeoh is in, and I love Michelle Yeoh, but the movie just didn't work for me after that, not as much. So that's what brought it down, because like I said, the first half of the movie I was riding pretty high with it, especially after the scaffolding scene. The bus scene was amazing, the scaffolding scene was amazing, and then they kind of abandoned it after that. Also wasn't sure why Awkwafina's character was even in China, but I guess that's because she was played by Awkwafina. So we'll just let that ride, and we'll sit that right at number 18. Number 17 is a movie I like better than some people, because a lot of people out here have this at the bottom of their list, but I do like this one, and that is Avengers Age of Ultron. So this was the second Avengers movie. It definitely, Ultron is one of the better villains in the franchise as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, like a lot of them, he was pretty much created by Tony Stark. He was definitely created by Tony Stark. The others were kind of inspired by Tony Stark, if you will. But Ultron was definitely a creation of his, and was just carrying out what he saw as the logical steps to his conclusion, which is a common theme with superhero villains. But I thought Ultron did it pretty well. The problem with the movie, what gets it kind of this low, is that it's overstuffed. So whereas the first Avengers movie and the later Avenger movies, they have a lot of characters, a lot of moving parts, but they juggle them well. This movie didn't juggle them quite as well. It's just everybody's kind of feels kind of stuffed, feels kind of rushed, and then that finale kind of goes on a little long, and some questionable decisions are made, and that includes Quicksilver and what happens to his character, and then the whole thing with not Black Widow, with Scarlet Witch, with that is with Scarlet Witch. Sorry guys, the whole thing with Scarlet Witch, the way her character is portrayed, and I'm strictly in this case talking about the accent of the character. And Marvel did this years before with the first X-Men movie with Halle Berry. They gave her this crazy accent right in the first movie, and then we get to the second movie and the accent is gone. Same thing has happened here with Scarlet Witch, and it was just silly to do. And that's a minor quibble, but yeah, I go with Age of Ultron in the number 17 spot. Number 16, and from here for a little while, and we get into movies that I really like better. So these movies I would say are better than okay. These are really good movies. So this one we go with Captain America, the First Avenger, and the first half of this movie is pure brilliance. The way they set up Steve Rogers as a character, the CGI even used on him to make him look skinny with the giant head, it works. It really works. And then when he transforms, a lot of people have said, well, this movie kind of goes downhill after he transforms. I don't think so. I think the movie just kind of, it's not as good, but it is still very good in the second half of the movie. Once he actually becomes Captain America, he's got to deal with the moral dilemma of serving his country the way they've asked him to, which is basically just be a show pony, and serving the country the way that he feels is best, and that is actually going out there and being involved and being part of the action. And of course we got Red Skull in here, Hugo Weaving, he does a great job. So I really like Captain America First Avenger. So it's not a knock on it that it's all the way down at 16. It's just that the other movies I think are even better. Number 15 is going to be the first Doctor Strange movie. So with this one, what keeps it out of the top 10, let me start there. What keeps it out of the top 10 is that it is note for note, beat for beat, almost a remake of the original Iron Man. And not bad. That's not a terrible thing, but I get it. And then of course you also get into you get into the whole white savior trope with him going to a different country and doing everything that nobody else could do. So those things kind of knock it back a bit for me. But what keeps it afloat as far as this goes, which is right smack dab in the middle of my list, is that this movie is one of the two best visual marvels in the Marvel universe. One of the two best visual movies. It borrows a lot from Inception, and it just expands on that, and it's just a gorgeous looking movie from start to finish. So that helps get it to 15. Not much higher, because again, I'm a big guy on storytelling, and the storytelling is a little bit weak here, so that keeps it from getting any higher. But the visual is just strong enough that I couldn't really drop it any lower either. Number 14, here is where I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. And I connect with this movie much more than the original, and possibly it's the family vibe comes through stronger in this movie for me, with our hero trying to connect with his dad, and that whole story coming together and falling apart. And so father-son dynamics are really interesting to me, and then him forming a family with the rest of the Guardians, or becoming more of a close-knit family. and that includes watching Groot go through his early stages. And like I said, I just connect with this one so much more than I do the first one. And I know that lots of people, lots of you guys probably watching, you've probably got Guardians, the first one, in your top five, and I don't, and but I do really like Volume 2, and I like it a lot better. I connect with it a lot better. Moving up to number 13 is going to be Ant-Man. So Ant-Man is the one movie, this movie and Ant-Man and the Wasp, if we're being honest, this movie are the ones that really rival the Doctor Strange movies for me as far as the best visuals in the MCU. Again, what they did here with perspective and changing perspective really, and showing him to be Ant-Man, our main character, to be a really small character at a lot of times, and the way they did the set and the design, it was pretty brilliant. So that just kept me in the movie all the way through it. The story works for me really well, and Michael Pena here just steals every scene he's in with his stories. So I have a blast watching Ant-Man. So that's why it gets up to number 13. Number 12 is going to be the first Spider-Man movie in the MCU, and that is Spider-Man Homecoming. So for me, this was a not a revelation, but a confirmation, because Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man in this movie, he showed up in one other movie before this as Spider-Man, and in that brief amount of time, I was like, yeah, this is Spider-Man. This is the Spider-Man that I'm used to as far as comic books and growing up. This is how I think the character is supposed to be portrayed. Well, this was the first full-length feature where he got to do that, and I really felt the same way. It was like, okay, yeah, it wasn't a fluke. He really is this. So I really enjoyed it. Him being in high school, being in New York. I thought they overplayed the Iron Man thing a little bit too much. Again, father-son dynamics are important to me, but this was like a little too much Iron Man in the movie. But still, really well done. Michael Keaton was a fantastic villain, and he's got one of the most menacing moments in the MCU, and he's not in costume. He's just sitting in the car talking to Peter Parker. But back to Peter Parker, played by Tom Holland. For me, he's the best mix of Peter Parker and Spider-Man that we've gotten on the big screen. Back in the day, Tobey Maguire I always thought was a really good Peter Parker. His Spider-Man was kind of weak, and part of that's not his fault. Part of that is just the writing, the technology, and all those kinds of things. And when we got to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man movies, I thought that he was a great Spider-Man, but not Peter Parker. He was just too cool for the room all the time. And I never really bought his chemistry with Gwen Stacy, even though he was actually dating Emily Stone, the actress who played her at the time. But here, I thought Tom Holland gave me a really good Peter Parker on one hand, and it just feels like the character that I grew up with. And then the same goes for when he's in costume as Spider-Man. We get the wisecracking, the talking, and of course the technology showing him swinging around is much better than it was in the Tobey Maguire movies, of course. So that gives me number 12 for Homecoming. Number 11 is going to be Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So again, visuals prop up the movie more than anything. This Sam Raimi, who directed those original Spider-Man movies, he's back here first time in the MCU with the second Doctor Strange movie. And what he does here is he actually reaches into his horror film bag. He did occasionally in the Spider-Man movies, but here he really reached into that horror film bag, his horror origin, his roots, the Evil Dead movies, even Darkman and some of the other things that he made, Drag Me to Hell. He reached into that bag and he pulled out a lot of stuff, and it all works. It made it a blast for me to watch, especially the scene where Scarlet Witch just starts just going crazy when they get to an alternate universe, and she's taken on I won't spoil it who she's taken on in case you haven't seen it again, even though I know most of you probably have. But he's really in his horror bag right here, so I loved it for that. What knocks it down here again is storytelling a little bit, and the story itself is actually stronger than the first Doctor Strange movie, which does get it up higher. The problem with the story is that it's kind of reliant on the TV shows. And for me, the movies should be more self-contained, or at least contained to the cinematic universe. So it's kind of hard to require the viewer to watch the TV shows and the movie. That's not fair to viewers and kind of limits your audience at the same time. And I feel the same way about comic books, even though I know I just spent a little time gushing over Tom Holland as the Peter Parker I knew and loved from the comic books. But the movies are not necessarily beholden to do everything exactly like the comic books because it's a movie. So as long as it tells a good story, it can kind of do what it wants. So in this case, it does what it wants, but it requires you to watch something else. Whereas I feel a movie shouldn't require you to watch something else unless it's a sequel to another movie. So yeah, requiring you to watch the other MCU movies is fine. Requiring you to watch the other Doctor Strange movies is fine, but requiring you to watch all 30 of the MCU movies, or however many came before Doctor Strange, and then watch all the TV shows and make sure you get all those references, especially WandaVision. It can be a bit overwhelming for me, not for me, because like I said, I watch all that stuff, but for a lot of people, they don't. So I get where they would come in and be like, okay, this is not making a ton of sense. But story wise, again, it is better than the first Doctor Strange. The visuals are just crazy in this movie. So that gets it to my number 11, which means it's going to take me into the top 10. So top 10 for me kicks off with a movie, another one that I know a lot of you guys have near the top. I don't. I do like it. So that is Endgame, Avengers Endgame. For me, it's a 3-hour movie that should have been 2 hours. That's my biggest gripe with the movie and why it's not higher. And I hate to start off with that because I do like the movie. I really like the movie. What they did with all the time travel was fantastic. It was fun. A lot of homages to Back to the Future. Of course, they even, call it out by name, and there are homages to other things as well. And so it was kind of seamless the way they put those characters back into scenes that were in earlier movies. And I haven't watched special features or anything, so I'm not 100% sure if they just refilmed it all or how from different angles or what exactly they did to do it, but it felt pretty seamless. So I was okay with that. But my biggest gripe again is it's a 3-hour movie and it should be 2 hours. That first 2 hours can be condensed into one, to be quite honest with you. We just kind of meander and mope and do a lot of things that we could have shortened. And then the other part of that is even the last hour could have been toned down some. And I know everybody loves it because that's the big battle with Thanos, and all the MCU characters basically appear in this scene. And for me, this is where the movie just gets to be too fan heavy. So it's not everything doesn't always make sense. It's just, hey, look at this. This is cool. And I'm not always the biggest fan of that. I'm just, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you can't really rely on that as a storytelling mechanism, because once that wears off, if you go watch it again, it doesn't work as well. And that's my big problem with Endgame. So when I watch it at home, watching it in the theater was amazing. When Captain America, and again, I'm spoiling a little bit here, but when Captain America caught the hammer, everybody went crazy. When all the female superheroes showed up, everybody went crazy. And when everybody from Wakanda showed up, everybody went crazy. But at home, it doesn't have the same effect once you've seen that 2 or 3 times. So that's why it kind of loses its luster for me and gets down to number 10, whereas it could be higher. And I have the same kind of issue with number 9. So number 9 for me is Spider-Man No Way Home. So again, it's a movie heavy into fan service. The story is pretty good. And the way it all comes together, once we get past the gimmick of introducing certain characters into the MCU, once we get past that, the way they all come together and work together and build a little bit of a team, that all works really well for me, and it's a blast to watch. What I didn't particularly care for was the things that set the plot into motion, in particular Doctor Strange. There's this guy who's supposed to be, one of the smartest guys in the world, certainly one of the smartest guys in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And he kind of does this thing like, yeah, okay, whatever. Let's just do it because you asked, and I know you, Peter. So let's just do it. And then things just get wrecked from there. And he never asks the questions that could have prevented the outcome. Let me put it that way. Until it's too late. And so that kind of didn't sit right with me throughout the whole movie. But at the same time, the movie is so fun and it's just a blast that I did really enjoy it in the end. Fan service problems aside. So again, the gimmick of introducing the characters back into the universe, certain characters in the theater, it was amazing because everybody was just losing their mind, even though most of us knew it was coming. People were losing their mind, but at home it doesn't play quite as well once you've watched it, once you've already seen the movie. So now we're going to go into my top 8, and for my top 8, guys, these are movies that I think are obviously these are the best MCU movies, and these are all the movies I consider to be just outstanding. And starting at number 8, I'm going to go with the very first Avengers movie. The fact that this movie ever existed, the way that it existed, is a bit of a miracle. Because we had never seen anything like that in movie history before. Not a movie that came about as a planned pinnacle or finale of a bunch of other movies. So for instance, you can go back to the 30s and go back to the Universal Monsters where, they all crossed over into each other's universes, into each other's movies. But there was no coherent plan in place when they made Dracula and then Frankenstein and the Wolfman and all those movies. There was no plan to say, you know what, we're going to make this all come to a head as part of a larger story. It was just, oh, Dracula's successful, Wolfman's successful, let's throw them in a movie together. Or Frankenstein, let's just throw them in a movie together. But it wasn't a planned attack, so to speak. And that's what this was. That's what the Avengers was. It was after we got solo movies for Iron Man and Thor and Captain America, and we were introduced to Black Widow and the Hulk we had a solo movie for, even though by the time we get to Avengers, he had changed actors. So we didn't have to spend a lot of time getting to know these characters. And this was really the first movie for me in the MCU where you had to have seen the other movies to really get, because you may not come in with the same affection for Thor or Captain America or any of those other characters that I mentioned if you hadn't seen those movies. So that, and it was fine because again, you're just watching the other movies, you're not watching TV shows and having to read comic books, all those things. But it works so that we can get to the team building dynamic, not the character building dynamic. Let me put it that way. So you don't have to spend time getting to know the characters, but you do have to spend time getting to know their dynamics with each other. And the movie does that very well. And then of course we get the finale with Loki as another one of the better villains in the MCU, and one of the better characters period in the MCU. And he gets a lot of he just kind of steals all of his scenes. He does, and Hulk does. And I hesitate to say Mark Ruffalo, even though I know it's Mark Ruffalo and he did the motion capture and all that thing. But it is, when you look at it, it's definitely not the same. Not Mark Ruffalo himself delivering those lines. So it's actually, Hulk, and I probably sound crazy right now, but Hulk definitely steals the show every scene he's in, including his scenes with Loki. So I really like that about this. If there are any kind of iffy things about the movie for me, it was the CGI at the end doesn't quite hold up, and honestly I think it's more that it's more of when I saw it live. I actually saw this in IMAX and 3D, and when you put the 3D glasses on and you get all the aliens flying around on the little ships around Manhattan, it didn't look good. And this is speaking from that perspective from 2012 when I went and saw the movie, not from 2022. It didn't really look good. So every time I've watched the movie since, which is quite a few times, I see that, even though I don't really see that because I've not seen it in 3D ever again. But I'm always reminded of that. Otherwise, it's a fantastic film, and highly recommend seeing this one. What am I saying? You guys have seen this one. Let's move on to number 7. So number 7 for me is Captain America: Civil War. Civil War is basically what Batman v Superman wanted to be. Their plot lines are really similar. They're really similar, guys. If you weren't clear on that, it's basically two sides of heroes, two sides of the argument on the good and bad of superheroes. They're there to protect, and they have all this great power that they can use, but should they be trusted with that power? And what about all the damage that they cause, the collateral damage they cause with that power and because of it? And do they attract more harm than they can do good? So both movies deal with those themes, but this movie does it so much better. It's infinitely better the way that Civil War handles this movie, and it's almost a shame that this is really a Captain America movie. I call this Avengers 2.5. It came out after Age of Ultron, and it really is an Avengers movie, but they just slapped the Captain America label on it. He's really not the main character in this movie. Tony Stark is more of a main character than him. We also get introduced to the MCU's version of Spider-Man through Tom Holland, which I spoke about before. And we also get introduced to Black Panther, played by the late great Chadwick Boseman. And both guys are outstanding in this film. Like I said, for me, the big deal is that it handles its subject matter so much better than another movie that came out around the same time, which is Batman v Superman. And it really makes us think, contemplate, and pick a side. So that gets it at my number 7. Number 6 is going to be the first Iron Man movie, and here's where the MCU was built. Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., is an amazing character. Downey, he is Tony Stark. As far as I'm concerned, as far as most of us concerned, he is Tony Stark. I know in real life, if I ever met him, he's Robert Downey Jr., but as far as when I look up on the screen, I see Tony Stark. And because he fully embodied that character, and he really brought us into the movie liking him, even though we should dislike him because he's just an arrogant, pompous ass kind of guy. And he makes it work. He makes the whole thing work. And in fact, the entire MCU is built on his character, at least up through Endgame anyway. Oh, actually, I should say not even through Endgame, through Spider-Man Far From Home, really, which came just after Endgame. Everything was built on Tony Stark, and with good reason, because he's an amazing character. And the trials and tribulations he goes through really work. His chemistry with Pepper Potts is amazing, and the movie just works. If there's one really big problem with the movie, not necessarily a big problem, this is a superhero movie problem, definitely an MCU problem, but it's a superhero movie problem in general, is that the bad guy always has the exact same powers as the good guy. And it works better here because it's the first one in the MCU. It's the first movie in the MCU, so it hadn't been quite played out yet. But it happens several more times in the franchise, a lot more times in the franchise. So that becomes a bit of an issue. And I thought that Jeff Bridges was maybe a little too hammy in the role, so not really the best villain for me. But otherwise, it's just, riding on the shoulders of Robert Downey Jr., it's an amazing piece of work. Number 5 is going to be the most recent MCU movie, and that is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. So this movie it has a lot in common with Eternals, in that it's one of the least MCU movies. It's not so much concerned with a lot of callbacks and a lot of Easter eggs. I know there's Easter eggs in the movie. The villain is an Easter egg, but it is a lot more self-contained than most of the movies in the franchise for the last 5-6 years. And it's possibly the most mature movie in the franchise, because due to the real life death of Chadwick Boseman, the movie had to deal with grief and it did it in a way that was respectful and again mature. And it just gives you the feels right off the bat. So as soon as the movie starts, we get a funeral, and that's not spoiling anything for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. And then the movie goes from there. I think one of the issues with the movie is that it's kind of it's steeped in that grief. So it's kind of, it's not as fun a movie as some of the other movies are, as most of the other movies are. It's not always as fun. It can be a little bit draining because of all the emotion involved in the movie. And just for good measure, they kind of throw something else emotional in the middle of the movie. Or I should say, well, yeah, in the middle, probably around the beginning of the third act, or to kick off the third act, I should say. And then they go a little extra and try to pull some more heartstrings when we get to the mid-credit scene. So it's just it can be a tough movie to watch at times, especially if you're a person who's a fan of Chadwick Boseman. Number 4 is going to be a movie that is definitely on the opposite end of the spectrum, and that is Thor Ragnarok. So Thor Ragnarok, all if you were paying attention, my other Thor movies are at the bottom of the list. This one is so much better than those movies, and it does crank up the humor from the first 2 movies, but it also balances it with the other things happening, and that includes underrated villain in my eyes, and that is Cate Blanchett as Hela. And she's fantastic in the movie. Her Loki and Thor, again, their chemistry is always great, and the things happening in the movie, it's just loads of fun. Jeff Goldblum is fun. We get a more fun version of Hulk again. He's always been kind of a fun character in the MCU, except for in his solo movie. But here he's really fun again, and we get him talking in this movie for the first time. And his chemistry with Tessa Thompson's character is really good. So I just have a great time watching Thor Ragnarok. Taika Waititi did a great job here, and I think just the balance in this movie works so much better than what he gave us with Thor Love and Thunder. So that's why this movie gets way up at number 4. I can throw this one on anytime and watch it and just have a blast. I don't need to watch the rest of the franchise to enjoy Thor Ragnarok. That takes me to number 3, another movie I can enjoy. Any of these movies, really, I can enjoy just alone. But number 3 is going to be the first Black Panther. And this movie, this movie crystallizes, this movie, Wakanda Forever, and I would say even Eternals, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of droning on, but these are the movies that really, really crystallize the importance of representation. As in, we get a story here made up of an entire cast of black people in this cast, save for a few characters here and there, of course. But that's not the reason why I like it, or not the only reason why I like it. Does play a part in it, and we get them where when we get a cast like this, it's not necessarily that, oh, there's lots of black people on the screen. It's that, okay, you know what? There's lots of different kinds of black people on the screen with differing opinions, showing that we're not a monolith and we're not all the same. So we have those who agree and we have those who disagree with whatever is happening. And then you throw in the main villain, Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. In my eyes, he gave the best performance of any MCU villain. And I might slide him slightly behind Thanos as a villain overall, only because of Thanos' abilities and power, and the stakes were so much higher. But as far as the performance goes, what Michael B. Jordan did with Killmonger was amazing. The writing of that character was on point. He had lots of salient points to make. He had a good point of view, good insight. His methods were questionable, and that's what made him the villain, was his methods, not necessarily his ideology, even though that is also questionable, and we can debate that. going back and forth. I've talked to just people in real life that we've gone back and forth about whether Killmonger was right or wrong, and in the end, even T'Challa, played by Chadwick Boseman, understands that, and he even changed his mind at the end of the movie. So that also helps make Killmonger a great villain. So even the hero recognized that he was not just all blowing noise and evil. So those things are what get that movie to this lofty spot for me. If there's anything that kind of holds it back, it's that the main character, Black Panther, T'Challa, he's really a side character in his own movie. Nothing against the other characters. As a matter of fact, that's another good reason we have strong female representation, not just racial, but gender representation also with this movie. And they all did great. Lupita Nyong'o, Angela Bassett, and going back to Angela Bassett, by the way, her performance in Wakanda Forever is outstanding. But coming back to this movie, we got her and the young woman who plays Shuri, and I'm drawing a blank on her name right now. Sorry, but they were all great. But at the end of the day, it's still supposed to be a Black Panther movie, and he was kind of relegated to the sidelines. So I kind of understand why when you think about what he might have been dealing with in real life. But when you just take the movie in a vacuum, I wanted more of him in the movie. So for me, this kind of falls into that Godfather realm where, I love The Godfather, and everybody tells me how great Marlon Brando is in The Godfather, but I don't really think so because, he spends most of the movie on the sidelines and then kind of comes back in. So that I had the same issue with Black Panther, but overall, like I said, still one of my favorite movies, number 3. And that just takes me to number 2. And that one is Captain America, The Winter Soldier. So this movie is really the start of the MCU doing other genres. So of course the MCU is based on comic books and superheroes, and they do superhero things all the time. But as the MCU has kind of gone on, they've branched out into other genres a little bit. And in this case, we kind of did a paranoid spy thriller for a Captain America movie, and it really works. It has a lot in common with a lot of spy movies that we saw in the 70s. And when I say spy movies, I don't mean James Bond movies. Though there's some of those elements in it here, this is surprisingly a little more grounded than a lot of James Bond movies, even though it's Captain America. And the other thing that really gets it here for me are the fight scenes. If you've heard me talk about fight scenes before, I'm kind of big on how they're framed. And if there's a drawback to the MCU, is that the fight scenes are often horribly shot or horribly shown to us anyway. We get a lot of over editing of fight scenes, and what I mean by that is you'll see a character and they'll throw a punch, but in that throwing punch you'll get 3 or 4 different cuts. You'll get a shot with the character like this, and then you get another angle of their arm, and then you get another angle of the shot kind of hitting the person, and it's all these quick fast cuts. And I get it, a lot of it might be to hide the actor's ability or lack of ability. But in this movie, that is kept to a minimum. We get nice wide shots, seeing Chris Evans and other characters do their thing in fight scenes. It's the most brutal fight scenes in the franchise. The only ones that really rival it, as far as I'm concerned, are actually the ones in Black Widow, though they're not quite as good in Black Widow, and a couple of maybe the two fight scenes in the 2 big hand-to-hand fight scenes in Black Panther. Other than that, like I said, there's a lot of cutting going on, and this one shows it excellently. But the storytelling is really what gets it here at number 2. It's a little slower than some of the other Marvel movies when I go back and watch it, but the story is just building, and is doing an outstanding job of that, and really drawing us in and making us feel the paranoia that the characters feel with what's going on with Shield. And of course, that elevator fight scene, going back to fight scenes, is one of the best, just period. All right, that brings me to number 1. If you've been keeping track, you know what number 1 is. That is Avengers Infinity War. For me, this is one of the best superhero movies ever made. Definitely in my top 3. and easily for me the top MCU movie. It's one of those things where you know going in that it's not gonna work out exactly like you want it to, because there was going to be a part two to this, where at least a lot of people knew that there was going to be a part two. A lot of people didn't know it because a lot of people don't follow movie news like a lot of us blue tubers do, or a lot of us MCU fans do, or superhero comic fans do. A lot of people don't follow that. They just show up for the movie, so they didn't know that there was going to be Endgame after that. So first off, we go through the movie and it's action packed from beginning to end. But while that action is going on, there's the story that is being pulled along right with it. It doesn't drag. It doesn't really pause the action too much. It just informs us of what's happening and why there is this action. And then all the characters coming together, of course, like with the precedent set by the other Avengers movies. You don't have to know, you don't have to spend time getting to know the characters. You know the characters. We're just waiting to see what they do. And then when we finally get to the end and what happens, when we get the snap, and then the movie ends. And if you don't know what the snap is because you've not watched Avengers movies, thank you, bless you for being here all this time. But go watch Infinity War. At least, go watch Infinity War. I remember being in the theater and the credits started rolling and everybody just kind of sat there slack-jawed, looking at each other and like, oh, wow, did we really ending it like this? And it was one of those things where, what happened in Endgame, we had an idea that, certain characters were going to be, certain characters will be coming back. We knew that, but to end the movie like that was still just a serious body blow, and it just worked perfectly. This is definitely the Empire Strikes Back of the MCU. The bad guys win, and then the other part of that is that, like Killmonger, is not necessarily that Thanos is doesn't have a point. He's definitely got a point. Again, his methodology is what makes him the villain. And the brilliant thing about Infinity War rather, instead of what also makes it work is that instead of treating him like the villain, they actually shot the movie as if he were the protagonist, as if he were the hero, and the Avengers are the ones who are trying to stop his plans, which is, in theory what they're doing, but it's usually shown from the perspective of the ones we've been rooting for all these movies. And a lot of this movie is from Thanos' perspective, and I thought that was a brilliant touch. So yeah, for me, Infinity War gets my number one spot. That is it. Thank you. If you watched this whole video, thank you for sticking in there with me. It's my longest video to date. And if you're an MCU fan, we'll keep watching them and we'll rank them again maybe next year. But yeah, and maybe I'll be a little less long-winded next year when I do this. But let me know your rankings on the MCU, if you like the MCU movies, and we can definitely debate it back and forth. What did you think of my list? Remember, this is my list. It's not your list, and I get it. Your list will be different. You'll probably have some of the movies I had near the bottom, near the top, and some of the movies I have near the top, near the bottom, or in the middle. That's just how it goes. So yeah, let's have a good talk about it. So like, comment, subscribe, do all those YouTube things. That's all I have for you on this one, guys. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.